Welcome, Ken. How are you?
I'm doing great, David, thanks.
Good stuff. So just to kind of introduce what we're doing and Ken as well. GCS is a technology recruitment agency. We work kind of across the world with different brands. We have a kind of a networking brand which is called GCS Connect. And GCS Connect really tries to bring the expert talent that we work with together with the innovative companies. And we do webinars online, both, and when we used to be able to kind of offline, we're mostly online now. And out of that, we've started this leader series, which is where we talk to real kind of leaders within the industry about what they're thinking about now and how that's going to change the future, and also how they're using their experiences from the past to shape their kind of reaction to the current business environment and what we feel the business environment is going to be going forward. We're really, really excited to have Ken Morse here. Ken has got 30 years experience. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. And that's within the kind of, generally within the kind of network telecommunications and broadcast industry. He's worked for some key players such as Cisco, Synamedia, and others, which we'll kind of go through. And he's currently consulting for Sky on a range of products that they're using within the Sky Q application. So very interesting stuff. GCS does a lot of work within broadcast. It's an area that we really enjoy working with those customers. And we know how busy it is at the moment and how much it's changing due to overall kind of competition within the industry, but also now with the different requirements of it, and also the kind of, lots of people are at home watching television and using the content. So it's how broadcast companies are dealing with that and taking the reaction to the opportunities. So it's great to meet you, Ken. Hi.
Hey, good to be here.
Fantastic. So I could obviously get a bit of an intro to yourself, but maybe it's kind of worthwhile, you taking us through what you've done in the past yourself, and just a little bit of a kind of an intro to yourself and your interests and your background.
Sure. So I've always kind of started off with embedded software, and it was, back in the 80s when early 80s home computing was taking off, and, one guy could actually write something and sell something. And so it was the old Commodore VIC-20 Acorn Atom days. And so I started writing software at my weekends and selling it on, selling games and things like that. But then from there, university, obviously. And at university, I was just damn fortunate to have the guy next to me in the attendance register with the next surname be a hardware whiz, and I was the software guy. And we did our projects in our second and third years that we ended up commercializing. So we did digital signaling processing system for Texas Instruments in, 86, something like that. And the university decided to do some innovation and actually formed a company with us to actually go and sell that. So very early on got into, this is what it means to start a company, and be the dog and pony guy as well, who's jumping in the car and driving to Martlesham Labs at BT or wherever and trying to sell the product whilst doing a PhD. So it was a lot of fun. And then from there, it kind of led to, it was interesting because for me, it was about not really feeling like I wanted to work for other people, and kind of wanted to try and, drive my own thing. And I ended up actually at IBM Hersley, and they were starting on very early digital video. This would have been 1988, 89, and kind of got in on the ground floor at that. And that was just something that really interested me. And the reality is, since then, I've never left that field. It's just been one that's continually evolving. As we've seen.
It's caught up with you, hasn't it? Really?
It has. Yeah, and so watching that evolve, watching the technology changes in it. I started a company in the Valley. I found myself in the Valley, courtesy of IBM. Then did my own startup, which was one of the lucky 1 in 10 that got sold on, which was great. And worked for Scientific Atlanta, getting more into the hardware side of things, in terms of getting set-top boxes and end-to-end delivery systems out there for television. And then getting acquired by Cisco, Scientific Atlanta was acquired by Cisco. And that then brought the whole transition to IP. So how do we take video over IP rather than the traditional cable satellite kind of approaches, which was fantastic to have access to, the capabilities of someone like a Cisco. And then a couple of years ago, Cisco decided to divest the video business as they were focusing more on their core networking side, and had the opportunity with a number of others to form Synamedia. As a standalone company, which was, again, a lot of fun. It's at the time we used to call it a 4,000 person startup, because we had a lot of engineers and not much else.
Yeah, well, I think we were just discussing earlier that the first time we met was in your office in Synamedia in the first week, and I think we were trying to work out how to supply some contract test engineers to you, when we didn't really know the processes at all. So we're kind of reinventing the processes for this huge organization without, kind of trying to fly solo. So it was definitely an interesting one, wasn't it? So.
Absolutely. It was a crazy and wild time, because it's one thing in a startup when you're going, we haven't got the processes, but you're affecting 10, 20 people. Yeah. When you've got 3,000, 4,000 who you're potentially affecting, there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And I think that's what particularly interested me. Obviously, broadcast is a key industry at the moment, but I think quite a lot of people that view these are looking at leaders and how they how the different skills that you use between different industries match, and as different industries converge in. And I think the interesting thing for yourself is, as well as the industry, is obviously different types of experiences, from small startups through to kind of large corporate organizations. So it'll be interesting to hear from yourself whether you feel that is a kind of, whether that's changed between the different types of industries and different types of organizations. So
yeah, certainly. I mean, you always hear the joke about the red tape. The bigger the company, the more the red tape.
Yeah.
I used to, my analogy used to be, if you wanted to get a slide deck done, a PowerPoint, if you're in a startup, it's you're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're at the next level company up, there might be a guy in the corner who can pretty it up for you, and put some nice graphics on it, which is great. You go to the next level company up, and there's actually, 4 people who are in a division, and they're creative media, and they will, do some amazing things to your raw material. And then I ended up at Cisco, and there literally was a building, and everybody in that building did that. So scale obviously comes into it.
Does it get done quicker though, Ken?
No, it probably ultimately gets done better, but that's always in the eyes of the beholder with those.
Yeah, exactly, particularly when it comes to creative. So,
but you do learn to appreciate the skill sets of these different capabilities, which is great. And you learn a lot from it, I think that's the big thing for me going through all these different sized organizations is what you learn. As a leader, in a smaller organization, I wore probably 9 hats. I was head of product management, program management, technical pubs, engineering, architecture. I was juggling all of those, and there was elements of that I was learning on the job, and just applying common sense. Which I think for me is one thing as a leader that I always try to rely on. People will generate situations, they may appear a little political or whatever, especially in the larger organizations. But at the end of the day, common sense does tend to trump things. It's about having access to the right data, and then with that data, making a common sense judgment about how to move forward, and knowing that you can always make, changes to that decision as you go. It's not about, being anchored to that decision you make that day. You can move forward a little bit.
So from yourself as a leader with your levels of experience, what would you say are the most kind of significant kind of business challenges that you've had to deal with, and whether those are kind of external or kind of internal, kind of up to now, as it were?
Yeah, I'd say there's a common theme that runs through all of them, and it's just the word change. And change can come in lots of different ways. As we talked, I've been through a number of acquisitions in getting acquired, and some divestitures along the way as well. and also through, you know, the ups and downs of markets, yeah, where, you know, you're in companies that are growing, and, you know, the morale in growing companies is always fantastic, yeah, because just everybody's psyched about how things are going. But then you can get downturns like 2008, you know, some of the challenges we're facing now, that can turn themselves into quite the opposite, yeah, where you're unfortunately having to let people go from the organization. And for me, in dealing with change, it's all about communication. And as much as you can, sincere communication. Yeah, it's always, you find as a leader, you know things that you can't communicate to the wider audience internally, but you can still communicate in a very sincere way. You know, be clear that this is what I can tell you right now. We'll tell you more as things evolve, things like that. And, you know, you get the respect of the teams. I've seen too often in organizations where there isn't, you know, consistent messaging or things like that. And it just seeds, you know, inadvertently distrust, yeah, and you lose morale in the organizations. And this could be changed in any direction, yeah, up, down, sideways, whatever. And I think with the acquisitions and divestitures I've been through in particular, you know, that's where people are worried about, am I going to have a job? Am I not going to have a job? What role could I have? All of those kind of things. So open communication for me is the one thing that I think really differentiates, you know, good leaders out there in the industry.
And I mean, we've been through changes ourselves in the business, kind of through an MBO and joining Engage. And you mentioned there quite a lot about kind of morale and, you know, the team ethic. Do you see that as a key element and a key requirement of a leader to build that?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you know, everyone drops the culture word, you know, all the time about, you know, let's rally around the culture. And a lot of organizations, you know, if you to ask individuals, their employees there, what is their culture? You'd probably get from, you know, 5 people, you get 6 different answers. And there isn't really enough focus on what it is that binds everybody together. And I think that is, you know, where once you've got an identified culture, you know, and then you've got employees that are behind that, you're able to really drive the organization, and it helps with morale because people understand from that culture then, you know, what are we trying to achieve? You know, how are we measuring ourselves? Again, you know, organizations that, you know, 12 months of the year go by and then they say, you know, well, we didn't do as well as we expected. Well, did the rest of the organization know what was expected?
Yeah, having that vision, having and talking about morale, because obviously now when we're in these circumstances which are obviously brought on by the pandemic and driving different types of change, how do you think, I mean, if we're talking about a major challenge of a leader to be creating a team, to be driving morale, to be driving culture, how can technology, do you feel, kind of help to overcome those challenges? Because obviously it's harder because you have physical contact. So maybe it's easy.
Yeah, and I think again it comes down to communication, and this is where you really have to communicate, because when you think about it, where a lot of people get their information in their job on a daily basis, you know, it's by the coffee machine or it's whatever, and those interactions have just disappeared, because everybody's locked down. And so as leaders and certainly as managers, you know, I encourage, you know, all managers to just, you know, be overly communicating with their employees. Lots of one-on-ones, and not one-on-ones, you know, one-on-ones are typically focused on, you know, what your work is and how's that. But, you know, now the focus needs to be on, you know, how are you doing? As an individual, you know, how's your family? Because, you know, as employers, it's our job to take care of our employees. And this is, you know, an unprecedented time for them. And so whatever we can do there, I think is important. The technology piece comes in terms of, you know, as we're talking here right now kind of thing, is to use these kinds of technologies for video conf and the like to make that human connection. You know, not just be a voice coming out of a speaker, but actually be able to see body language And, invariably, you're learning a lot more about other people's kitchens at the moment. Yeah, when you're on these calls where you go, oh, so you work out of the kitchen? Yeah, I've worked out of the kitchen a couple of days, blah, blah, blah.
We'll come on to backgrounds in a minute, Ken, because I don't know if this is a side thing within the Leaders series, but you've definitely got the best background going on there.
It's all down to my wife.
Fantastic. Yeah, you explained that. And you, just going back to what you said about digital video and obviously the importance of it now, did you, I mean, if you were involved with it in IBM in the early 80s, did you foresee this happening? Or how would you say it kind of, why couldn't it be done in the late 80s?
Yeah. So I think, a lot of the enabling started happening, which was, to enable the move to digital. Yeah. When I look at how things evolved, we had analog distribution, people loved it. We had VCRs, yeah, we're all there with flashing 12s on our VCRs because no one remembered how to program the clock, all that kind of stuff going on. And then as we started to develop codecs to actually encode, with MPEG to start with, we could then get the content into the digital domain. At which point there was a lot more you could do with it from a manipulation point of view and a delivery point of view. And then it was about, okay, now I need a box, to put, on the shelf next to the TV to actually be able to decode and see that. And that drove chipsets, that drove, capabilities, the rise of the Broadcoms and the like, and the STs and the LSIs at the time, to be able to enable kind of a cost-effective design actually happen. And then having, broadband pickup, over cable, gosh, in 2000, we were doing, tens of millions of homes video on demand in the US. Over IP, but all over the cable infrastructure. But now with broadband prevalent, it just opens up all these other opportunities for, content delivery over the top. So many things. Could I have envisioned all of that? To be honest, if I'd stopped and thought about it, I might have had a better chance of envisioning it all. But when you're in the moment, you're innovating, and amongst great colleagues who are helping you with that, you're just excited by what you're doing at the time.
The next step, as it were. Yeah, as opposed to the big dream at the end. So
yeah.
I mean, from my side, it's, as a leader myself, without the sort of kind of technology innovations that we've got now, this situation would be so much more difficult, and almost impossible, so the fact that we've got that is great. So how are you dealing personally with kind of working from home? Is this a normal thing for you? Is it positive, negative?
Yeah, so I guess throughout certainly the last 15 years in my career, I've found myself working from home maybe 1 or 2 days a week. It really depended on what was on and the role and stuff. This is full core now, and I think what I found is important is you've got to have a schedule. If you treat it as kind of easy come, easy go, it's really difficult to actually separate work from non-work.
Yeah.
So for me, it's I talk to people and they're like, yeah, I got up, it was about 12 o'clock, I thought I should maybe have a shower by then, because I'd been working and I didn't take like, no, just get up, follow your normal routine kind of thing. But then what people I don't think appreciate, I think we all fall into it. We go, am I being as productive as I should be? And there's this feeling that you need to do more work almost. And the reality is, from what we've seen, and certainly what I've seen, is people are, as a general rule, just being as equally productive. And what they need to ensure they do is take breaks throughout the day. Yeah. Just allocate some time to, just go off, from wherever you're working at your kitchen table or whatever, go for a walk, come back, do that daily or twice daily exercise. That helps.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my breaks are speaking to leaders on video conferences. That's how I spend my spare time. So, and obviously, we're trying to make this a kind of a past, a future, but obviously the present now is very much kind of COVID-19. And at the moment, you're kind of leading projects for Sky and leading kind of application integration, but obviously using your kind of background of different experiences that you've had. How do you think that this current situation is affecting how you act as a leader, and has it changed it in any way in relation to other challenging moments that you've had?
Yeah, I think, I'd anchor back to that earlier comment about change and uncertainty, which is one of the other things that comes with change. And so again, you can't over communicate, and I see it inside Sky. Stephen Van Rooyen, who runs the UK, Germany, and Italy businesses for the extended leadership. There's a call every week, and it's not just about business items. It's how he's dealing personally with things, and you kind of leverage his stories with your own stories, and you propagate that through your organization to each of your employees, and also listen. I think there's a lot more listening that you have to do with your workforce right now, because these are very difficult times, and it's not one size fits all. You've got people who are homeschooling whilst trying to work, whilst trying to do this and juggle that. And you've got to, as a leader, acknowledge that, give some flexibility in there. We have people who work offset hours, things like that. There's some people who, they have a designated day, and that's, maybe a childcare day. So every Wednesday, that's what they do. So I think being flexible as a leader and giving people the opportunity to do what they need to do for themselves and for their families gives you, a better return when they're actually then spending the time that they can allow on what, we need them to do. So finding that balance, letting them know that's okay, I think is really, really important.
What I find is quite interesting, and we've had comments from other leaders, is that a lot of your leadership, as you talked about, is vision, like long term. This is where we're going, and sometimes I think the leader now has to, we've got to plan what we're doing next week now. It's quite specific tasks, isn't it? And
it is. When I look at Sky, it's like, everyone, except for essential workers in studios and looking after the broadcast infrastructure, just about everybody's work from home right now. And there's things that some people can fully do their jobs from home, some can't, and so some or can do it to a certain degree. And we certainly see, in some areas, you can argue that productivity goes down a bit, but that's more because of lack of access to equipment that's only in the buildings. And so I've been impressed to actually see that from a development perspective, we're not unduly affected from a development timeline perspective with what's going on, which has been great, and is just a testament to how adaptable people can be.
And I mean, on the technology side of things, I mean, what type of tools are you using? Is this the first kind of fully remote team that you've run on a kind of global basis, would you say?
Yeah. Well, when I was at Cisco, I used to have, there was like probably 3,500 folks, and they were across multiple geographies, which is a different form of remote, and it's interesting that a lot of the tools that we use there, I'm finding come into play again here, so obviously the video conferencing thing, the other things we have is just having like open Slack channels, so the Slack channel just open, everyone who's working on something, whenever they need something, just post a message to it, someone will catch it and get back to them. I think some of the other things we do is just have, take one of these Zoom calls or whatever, and just have an open call for, 4 hours or whatever, whilst people are working on the same thing. And they can just shout out to one another, when they need some help on something or whatever. And I think all those kind of things really, really helps in terms of making people, again, feel that connection. And, the technology now, you don't think about it. I think, the biggest decision you got to make is what Zoom background you're going to put on you.
That's right. Yeah, it's important, isn't it? So, and I think that for me is what we're seeing, is that people kind of working with the technology they've got, working around it, kind of getting the best out of it. And like you said, you're starting to see positives kind of coming out of this, as well as problems. Kind of overcoming these challenges means that you can be more productive. I mean, out of the actual broadcast industry, obviously you've been within it for many years. Do you see this as quite a kind of a positive moment for the broadcast industry? And I guess I could ask that 3 months ago, because there's so much going on. And now, do you think the actual the trajectory of the broadcast industry has changed even in the last 3 months? Or
I think I think it's interesting because when you look down the food chain, if you look from someone like a service provider like Sky, obviously that any service provider today is having revenue impacts, whether it's lack of sport or whatever it is, which cause them in turn to look at, if the top line is coming down, what am I spending on my bottom line? And so, looking at what do I need to do for the rest of the year as I plan to come out of this. So in some respects, there's a lot more focus on, what's really important. There's a lot of prioritization that's going on, which I think, is ultimately a good thing. Because too often, especially large pre-existing businesses, they just kind of keep running along, and they'll add things and whatever. But even some of the fundamental stuff that they do never gets questioned. It's because we've always done it. And so when you get something as impactful as what we're going through with COVID, I think it allows organizations to take the time to really analyze where they're spending their money, what's the return they're getting on it, and potentially deploy resources into other more growth areas. So, some of the employee base is getting shifted across to, more newer stuff, that we think we can get a better return on in the near term. So I treat it as a positive. I think when we come out of it, there's obviously going to be, there's a bunch of recruiting that hasn't happened.
Yeah, hopefully.
So there's going to be that. That's got to be balanced by, the other things I just talked about, but there'll certainly be that. And I think people will absolutely, when they recruit, they'll be probably a little bit more tighter in terms of getting exactly the right individual for the role, and try and maximize the benefit of every hire that they do in the near term for probably the rest of this year before it returns into, a more kind of business as usual kind of approach.
And do you feel that, just obviously we're all consumers of content, as it were, and linking into that, I'd assume that kind of creating content and stuff kind of going forward is actually going to be a bigger problem. Like the technology is working like a dream. As finding the programs now, how are they going to film the films and do that sort of thing? Have you got any update for us on that side of
I think there's probably we're going to see a lot of animated shorts come out.
That's right.
But it's been interesting, with all the current affairs programs, the John Olivers and the Tonight Shows and all of that kind of stuff. We've all seen them, recording their own, against to an iPhone, and stuff like that, and people. And it's teaching people that, again, in those environments, the story is the important thing. You're not sitting there going, oh, but the production quality on this is abysmal. It's like, if the engagement and the story is there, you're pulled in. And I think that's it's putting an onus back onto that a little bit. I think is one thing that we'll learn coming out of this versus solve everything with outrageous special effects.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, although they help. Marvel will be right as well. So I mean, how going forward then? How do you think? We talked about digital video being such a help now. What other types of innovative technology do you think is coming down the line, both in terms of broadband, in terms of networking communication, in terms of broadcast itself? What's coming down the line? Do you think is going to help businesses themselves survive and thrive?
Yeah, well, I think you're going to see a lot more of what I would call opening up of platforms. You know, when I look at what we're doing at Sky, you know, we had a number of applications on the platforms to start with, you know, the Netflixes of the world and things like that. And now, you know, the same way Comcast has already done this in the US, you know, Comcast has, you know, thousands of apps out there that they're enabling through their platform. And as Sky, we're looking to do similar things. And so that gives new venues for people to bring, you know, services to consumers through these service providers that have, you know, got these customer relationships in place already. I think there's new avenues to market. Yeah, I think it is important there. And I also think, you know, going through all this lockdown and everything, as we were just talking about, you know, the John Oliver type talk to camera stuff, people are coming up with more innovative ways to do things, and on the content side, as well as with the technology. And so I think we'll see some more of those come into play. It's going to be interesting, yeah. Obviously, you know, on the broadband front, you know, that's one thing that I think, you know, has been pretty clear. You know, major, you know, service providers stepped up from day one and said, we'll make a tier of broadband available to everybody for free. Yeah, who doesn't have it today? Comcast did that in the US, some other providers did it. And that just shows, you know, how much of a lifeline service it is now. Yeah, it used to be, you know, electricity, gas, and water, and I think you can add broadband to the list.
Yeah,
because
well, I spent the whole of yesterday evening trying to make my internet work again. There was definitely some meltdowns happening. I had restarted my router and it wasn't working. It's a beat, I'm afraid, Ken. But I was cursing the whole world. You know,
I've had a few of those. My default position is always the same engineering position, which is turn everything off and then on.
And then restart it. I think you know, I think it is true that obviously a lot of the kind of platform is there, and how people are building kind of content and ideas around that is what's kind of particularly kind of interesting. You know, we're obviously within the recruitment market, and you've recruited yourself, you know, for startup teams and for corporate teams. Before we kind of go into the next question, what would you say was different if you're recruiting to be a leader within a startup or within a corporate? Do you look for different people, or do you look for the same types of people?
I mean, I've always looked for strong communicators, yeah. And I think, as we were talking about earlier, that's only more appropriate now, given the situations. And I think, you know, there's another level to this as well, which is because leaders, managers have been communicating more with their employees. When we're back to normal, there's going to be that expectation. Because we just set it during lockdown. And so I think it's going to be a lot of interpersonal skills are going to be valued a lot more higher than perhaps they are today.
Yeah.
You know, the technical skills and all of that, you know, they always are what they always are. But I think it's a lot more of the soft skills, yeah, that are going to be important as we go forward.
Yeah, which is obviously interesting. That's always the harder thing to test, isn't it? You know, you can't, and it's probably even harder to test in an interview, you know, and that's certainly something that my industry is kind of not struggling with, but dealing with at the moment, because, you know, how to present the soft skills correctly from a technology recruitment perspective, generally it's like, right, yeah, you've got embedded skills, this particular device driver, Linux, etc. Here you go. Test whether they can do as they say, and no one's ever going to lie, really. I mean, sometimes people do, but no one's ever going to lie about their knowledge of device drivers, because you're going to go into an interview and get blasted away in the first minute. So you have to be at that type of standard. But it's much easier to say, yes, I'm a great communicator, I'm a great team worker, that sort of thing. So I think we are dealing with that in terms of understanding the best ways to kind of qualify and grade that, if you know what I mean. So
yeah, and I think you've got to come up with some great, you know, exercises, whatever, to do that. And it is very difficult. I totally agree with you. You know, I tend to get a sense from folks, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to, you know, for the industry and certainly for the recruitment industry to think about how you can better, you know, analyze those soft skills as part of the process. Yeah.
How do you see that we talked about convergent technologies, but how do you see the recruitment landscape in your industry changing over the next kind of couple of years coming out of this?
It's a good one. I would say, yeah, like I said earlier, there's initially going to be, you know, a bit of latent demand that's going to pick up, but I think people will be more selective. It's not going to be you know, I've got 20 positions to fill, and I'll just fill them with the first 20 that kind of meet the baseline checklist. It will be trying to look a little bit more at the soft skills and things like that in there as well. I think then over time, I mean, you know, it's always funny. One of the comments that's always been made in the industry I'm in is, you know, even during a downturn, people drink beer and watch TV. So, you know, you work for a brewery.
I certainly do.
A brewery or in the television industry, you know, you're in a better place than most. And I think that'll continue to be true. I think there are going to be the barriers to entry. So, you know, if you want to bring an OTT service to the table or whatever it is, or an app or whatever, the barriers to entry are actually reducing. Yeah, they're not getting harder, they're getting easier in terms of the technology, the tooling, the education, all of that. So I think it's about, what I'd be saying is, you know, people need to think about, you know, what is the lay of the land out there, what's all the possibilities and capabilities, and then look at how you can innovate on top of those and come up with something that, you know, can be a great new business idea for, you know, a new company to then, you know, drive, you know, more recruiting into that. I think there's, you know, it's one of those things, it's the earlier comment, you know, when you're in the middle of something, you don't stop long enough to think about the possibilities.
That's right.
I think there's an opportunity now for people, you know, at any level to just stop and think about possibilities, do a little bit of research, think about that. And those can be great in things that, you know, if you're a candidate in an interview process, to go, you know, hey, I thought about this, and, you know, this could be an interesting thing, you know.
Yeah.
Less kill a one than keep it to yourself and patent it. You know?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like you did. That's right. It's a good way to kind of move forward. Yeah, I definitely think, you know, with the broadcast industry, you know, diverging, there's so many different players within the market playing in different kind of areas that yeah, there is a lot more opportunity, as it were, to disrupt, isn't it? You know, you talk about the banking sector being disrupted, the broadcast sector, everywhere's being disrupted, and this is a right time for disruption, isn't it?
Yeah, the other game we used to play in the industry, at least me and a few colleagues, was, you know, if you went back to the late 90s, and at the time, you know, interactive television, everything was going to be great, and we literally built a slide, and it was just full of all the logos of all the companies, yeah, that were trying to play in that space. And there was like 100 and something on there, yeah.
Yeah.
And then every year we'd revisit that slide and go, who's bought who, yeah, who's merged with who's gone out of business, and you just watch it over time, this, you know, pulling together. And it's been the same in the networking space and the service provider space, yeah. We used to have, what was it, something like 12 cable companies in the UK, yeah, and now there's Virgin Media, soon to be Virgin Media / Television.
Yeah. Even they're merging, so we're left with one. So
yeah.
And I guess that's down to kind of good leadership within those businesses, the innovation, the ideas, and how they've got that vision. So I guess this is a time for leaders, I think.
Yep, I think so.
Good stuff. Well, Ken, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you as ever, and have a great day and a great rest of your week.
Okay, thank you, David. Enjoyed it.